Well, Bev, Liz Truss's administration had been under an enormous amount of both political and economic pressure ever since it handed down its mini budget a little less than 2 weeks ago. Now, that mini budget was supposed to be a financial statement about how this new government was going to navigate winter as the country faced rising energy prices, a cost of living crisis, inflationary pressures. And the mini budget did receive widespread criticism. It contained a suite of measures, but a central part of it was a £45 billion tax cut. And the most controversial part of that tax cut plan was an intention to scrap the top tax rate for the highest paid earners. And because the administration didn't release a detailed financial statement about where this money was going to come from, how these cuts were going to be made, a narrative developed that Liz Truss was borrowing money to give the highest paid earners in Britain a tax break. So you can see how that might play in the electorate. In recent days, there has been the Conservative Party conference, and that's where it became very clear that Liz Truss and her Chancellor had failed to convince their own party, had failed to convince many MPs that this was a plan they could sell to the public. So we'd heard from former cabinet ministers saying that they didn't believe this plan to scrap that top tax rate would be able to pass the House of Commons. Now, initially, the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, really dug her heels in just 24 hours ago. We heard her say that she was standing by this plan, that she really wanted to see it happen. So then, less than 24 hours later, to hear from the Chancellor to say that they were making this U-turn, it is a huge political defeat for the new Prime Minister. Perhaps it's a move that might buy her some time politically, if her fellow party can see that she's willing to listen or to make some concessions. But the early remarks we're hearing from analysts is that this won't go far enough to confront some of those economic pressures.
Yes, of course, we saw the pound really collapsing and investors really spooked. Do you think, from what you were just saying, this will calm things down a little, or do you think there's going to have to be more done?
Well, this plan to cut taxes was about a $45 billion tax cut plan. This move to scrap the top rate of income tax for the highest paid earners, that accounts for only about £2 billion. I mean, that's still an eye-watering amount of money, but in the scheme of $45 billion, it really pales in comparison. So if we're the Bank of England thinking about £43 billion rushing onto the UK economy, or £45 billion, it probably doesn't make an enormous amount of difference. But in terms of the political reaction, will this go far enough to help shore up Liz Truss's political future? Already we're hearing from some of those critics, former cabinet ministers, who are saying that they're pleased that the Prime Minister has listened. So it might buy her just enough political power for the short term to perhaps mount a recovery with her colleagues and the public, but economically it's still a very tough situation.
Yeah. You know, you talked about this sort of pushback from her own party. Was there almost a revolt on the cards, and sort of what impact is this now having on the Labor Party and their standings in the polls?
Well, Bev, at the moment, the Conservative Party is having some of its worst polling it's had since the late 1990s. And if we think about the fact that Liz Truss was brought in as the new Prime Minister to replace Boris Johnson because the Conservative Party was worried about how he was faring in the polls, well, this hasn't really worked out at all. And on top of that, Labor is performing the best they have in a long time in the polls. Just recently, we've also seen the Conservative Party conference and the Labor Party conference. It's been quite interesting to hear reports about the mood in both of those parties. We're hearing that in the Labor Party, it's quite a jubilant mood, that they're feeling very positive about the future election, and that within the Conservative Party camp, they're not just worried about their political electoral future, but there's genuinely concern from MPs that this administration could tank the economy. Really strong language coming out of there that really gives you an insight into how the Conservative Party are feeling versus how the Labor Party is feeling at the moment.
Isabella in London, thank you so much.